A black woman in the Wild West opened her door one stormy night and said, "My room only has one bed." She expected trouble. Instead, she met the man who would change what she believed about mercy, love, and staying. The wind came first, the way it always did in Silver Mesa, dry and impatient, pawing at the boards, lifting the red earth into the air until the world looked smoked over. It rattled the shutters of the little house that sat on the edge of the cemetery, a house that smelled of pitch and resin, of pine shaved thin as paper. Inside, a woman worked by lantern light. Her hands were dark with sawdust. She brushed her fingers together before touching anything living, a habit as old as grief. Evelyn Ward kept her tools in strict lines. The mallet rested to the right of the plane. The box of copper tacks sat in a square of shadow near the wall. The lid cracked, the heads shining faint and dull. Over the door, a wind chime she'd made from coffin nails trembled, its chiming scarce and dry as bone. She had told herself more than once to take it down. She never did. When it rang, she knew the wind had found her again, and there was a kind of honesty in that. She was fitting a lid to a narrow box. The undertaker in town had said the boy was small, and there was no money, when the knock sounded. It wasn't timid. 3 times. Hard enough to tremble the lamp flame. The sound made the nails above the door jitter into speech. Evelyn paused with the lid in her hands, feeling the weight of it through the dust on her palms. She listened. The wind always knocked, on walls, on the unlatched gate, on the brittle crowns of the mesquite. But this had a shape to it. A will. She set the lid down. The silence after felt like an intake of breath. She took the lantern and crossed the room. The burn on her right wrist, an old bright scar from a kiln that once fired the pitch, caught the light. She set the lantern by the door and positioned herself beside the frame, rather than square in front of it. It had been long years since she had given anyone a straight line on her body. She listened again. The nails chattered, a small metal prayer. "Who's there?" she asked, not loud. The wind answered first, a fistful of dust through the cracks, then the shape of a voice behind it, low and rough, a man's voice worn to the grain. "Night's coming fast," he said. "I'm cold and I'm bleeding. I saw your light." Evelyn opened the door the width of her palm. The lantern threw itself into the dark and returned with a man's face. He was tall in the frame, broader than the door's idea of him. His hat was pulled low, the brim rimmed with dust, his coat stiff with it. Blood had dried black across the sleeve where he held it to his side. A horse stood at his back, ribs showing under a hide that had once been bay and was now the color of road. The horse's breaths rose in white puffs and smashed against the cold. "I don't keep a boarding house," Evelyn said. "No need of one," he answered. "Just a spell out of the wind. For me and her." Evelyn looked past him to the horse. The animal's ears barely twitched. The eye that caught the light did not flinch. The wind caught the coffin nails above her head and made them sing again. And it was a small help in deciding. Wind and wood, she trusted. People were a harder thing. "Your name," she said, because names kept strangers from being shadows. "Jameson Cole." He didn't ask for hers. She liked that. Men who asked too quick often wanted more than a name. She lifted the latch. The door stuck. The boards had swelled with the day's heat and gone stubborn with the cold. She worked it once, twice, and it gave. She stepped back, making room for him to choose the rest. That was the other habit she had learned. Never pull a person in. Let them decide the distance they intend to keep. He brought the horse onto the porch first, then himself, careful to keep his body between Evelyn and the animal, a quiet courtesy, the sort that told more about a person than any oath. Dust shook from him as he crossed the threshold. It drifted down onto her plank floor like a snowfall the desert would never know. "Fire's there," she said. "Water by the basin." He didn't thank her. He nodded once, which was better, and draped his hat on a chair back and his coat across it. She saw then how the blood had started. No clean slice, not a knife wound, but a tearing sort of hurt under his ribs, high enough to slow a man down and low enough not to stop him outright. The shirt beneath was coarse and had been washed enough times to soften the weave. There was a stitch or two he'd put in himself, where the seams had failed, and it made her think of the things people saved when there wasn't much to save. He moved like a man who had spent years minding his feet and his hands, who knew where to put them so nothing broke. He held his side and breathed through his teeth only once, when the coat tugged wrong. The horse, the poor old thing, stood in the doorway and looked at Evelyn as if waiting for permission. "You can bring her just inside," she said. "Floor's swept. It won't put me out." He led the horse to the corner, where she kept the sacks of pine shavings and the coil of rope. The animal lowered its head and pressed its muzzle to the rope, and then to Evelyn's sleeve, as if cataloging the smells that made up this place. Sweat, wood, pitch. A long time ago. Lavender. Evelyn lifted her hand and laid it on the horse's neck, a touch light as ash. She brushed her fingers together first, out of habit, dust from the dead shaken loose before she touched the living. "What's her name?" she asked. "Mercy," he said. There was a place in Evelyn's chest that went soft hearing that, and she didn't like to admit it, even to the emptiest room. Names mattered. Mercy. Some men named their horses for speed or luck. Some named them for what they needed. "You're a ways from anywhere," she said. "Seems that way," he agreed, and she heard in it the kind of tired that didn't ask to be understood. She brought the basin and the rag. He peeled the shirt away, and she saw the wound. A snag of barbed wire, by the look of it. The desert did that. Lay quiet, and look flat, and then catch you on the one thing you didn't see coming. She cleaned the tear with short, sure motions, her mouth pressed into a line. He didn't pull away. He watched the knot of nails above the door move in the wind. When he breathed, the lantern flame ticked along the glass like a moth that wanted in. "You'll need to lie flat a while," she said. He glanced toward the single bed, a simple frame of fur, built by her own hands. The quilt was pieced from shirts she'd taken in trade and cloth she'd dyed with coffee. The wind pushed at the window, and the lamp rocked. And in that uncertain light, she felt the shape of her own words before she spoke them. "My room only has one bed," she said. It was not invitation. It was a fact hung like a nail for him to see. The sound of the chime gathered behind it, a thin metal choir. He did not smile. She would not have trusted him if he had. He looked at the bed, then at the floor where the horse stood, lifting one hoof and setting it down again to tell them all it was still able. "Then I'll take the floor," he said. You'll take the bed." She waited for him to add something to that. An insistence, a prideful note, some balm a man might offer to show he'd got manners. He didn't. The shape of the words stayed plain. That steadiness, the unvarnished kind, eased something inside her she hadn't known was braced. "You're bleeding," she said. "People bleed out on floors same as on beds." He considered that and let the corner of his mouth tilt. Only a little, like a man remembering he used to know how. "I won't if you stitch me right." Evelyn gave half a nod and fetched the needle. It lived with the thread in a tin that had once held peppermints. She warmed the needle in the flame and worked in the slow, careful way her mother had taught her, when there were still hands to teach and a girl's patience to be used on something other than endurance. Jameson held still, one palm pressed to the edge of the table. The skin there was scarred with old roping burns. When pain came, it showed as a faint tremor in his wrist, and nowhere else. Mercy breathed, a low, steady sound, and the nails sang. And outside, the wind worried the mesquite and the long grass around the graves. Names lay on stone under the hill, names Evelyn knew by heart. Some nights she spoke them aloud, not to call the dead back, but to leave a light for them, the way you leave a lamp burning in a window for a husband who drank too late or a son who rode too far. She knotted the thread and bit off the end. "You've got a place to be," she said, not asking. "I had one," he said. "It burned." She looked up. His face didn't change saying it. She appreciated that, the way some men will make a show of sorrow, looking to see where it lands. He set his hat on the table, and she saw the ring of sweat dark on the brim, the rubbed patch where a thumb had learned to land. There were a dozen stories in that hat, and not one of them asked to be told. "Food," she said. "There's stew. Bread if it hasn't gone to stone." He took what she set before him. He ate slow and kept his eyes on the bowl, as if the act of eating were the only thing asked of him, and he meant to do it right. Evelyn sat opposite and did not pick up her spoon. She listened to the rain that wasn't coming, to the chime that kept picking up where the wind left off. "You live alone out here?" he said after a while. Not quite a question. "I live here," she said, which was the only part of the sentence that had ever mattered to her. "I saw the graves." "They see me too," she said. "It evens out." He nodded at that, as if there was sense in it. And there was. She did not speak of the other house, of the door that had swung open on a night just like this, and of the faces that had filled it, and of the rope laid like a warning on the table where they sat now. She did not speak of the day after, when the wind had gone quiet, and the town had chosen not to see what the wind had done. There would be time for remembering when remembrance did some good. Tonight, there was a man breathing, a horse swaying on its feet, and the wind. When the bowl was empty, he set the spoon in it quiet, as if not to wake anything. He looked toward the bed again, not in the way men do when they calculate, but like someone measuring a distance and deciding they could walk it without complaint. "You'll sleep," she said. "I'll watch the fire." He swept his hat off the table and stood, feeling how the wound pulled now that the needle had done its tidy work. "I'm not used to folks watching out for me," he said. "Then you'll learn," she said, and it wasn't unkind. He lay down on the floor beside Mercy's shoulder with his coat for a pillow, and Evelyn watched the strange shape of two lives make itself at home in her house. The lamp burned slow. The stew pot ticked as it cooled. Something in the wind changed. It set the chime to whisper instead of rattle. She thought of the lid she had been fitting, and of the boy she'd been told to make small, because life had. She looked at Jameson's face in the lamp glow, the hard lines softened at last by sleep, and at the horse's ear bent toward her as if it were listening in case she needed to say something important. Her own bed stood there, square and simple and faithful. It had held her one set of bones night after night and never asked for company. She sat at the table a long while, breathing with the fire, and thought how a house can be quiet without feeling empty, and how rarely those two things meet. When she rose, the hour had thinned to the edge of morning, when the cold is as deep as it will get. She checked the lamp, pegged another piece of pine to the fire, and turned. Jameson stirred, the pain waking with him. His eyes opened to the color of old smoke. He watched her move through the room as if memorizing where everything went. Lantern, basin, nail box, the lid leaning against the wall. He made to sit up. She put a hand out, palm down. "Don't," she said. "It'll tear." He settled back, listening. The house made a new sound then, one Evelyn could tell the difference of because she had heard them all. It wasn't wind. It was the day shifting its weight in the far-off light. She crossed to the workbench and touched the coffin lid to feel the plane of it, the way the wood eased under her palm when it had been worked by honest hands. She didn't look over her shoulder when she spoke next. The words found him anyway. The wind chime gave a small, minor ring, like a bell in a chapel somebody had forgotten to mend. "There's a coffin needs its lid," she said. "If you're staying, you'll help." The day rose pale, the sky the color of tin hammered thin, and the wind had quieted to the sound of its own exhaustion. Evelyn woke to the smell of iron and pine, the house still dim except for a low wedge of light slipping through the shutter gap. Jameson was already sitting up on the floor beside the cold fire, his hand pressed against his side where the stitches held. Mercy stood near the open doorway, head bowed, muzzle damp with her own breath. "You slept?" Evelyn asked. Jameson nodded once. "Enough." The silence between them was not awkward. It was the kind of quiet made by people who both knew how much noise a day could hold. Evelyn stirred the fire, coaxing new flame from what was left, and the house began to breathe again. Crack of wood, soft hiss of resin. She set a pot of water above the flames, the smell of coffee rising slow and bitter. Outside, the earth looked washed. Red clay, darkened by night's dew. Graves on the hill were rimmed in silver light, their wooden crosses leaning at various angles like men too tired to stand straight. Evelyn's eyes found them without thinking. Each cross she had carved herself, rough, plain, unadorned. They were her quiet ledger of the years. Jameson rose carefully, not to disturb the stitches. He moved to the workbench where the unfinished coffin waited. The lid she had shaped the night before rested against the wall, smooth in the middle and still raw at the edges. His fingers brushed the plane marks. "You make these alone?" he asked. Evelyn poured coffee into 2 tin cups. "No one stays long enough to help." He took a sip, the steam rising between them like something alive. "You charge much?" "I charge what they can pay," she said. "Sometimes that's cornmeal, sometimes just a prayer." "Prayers don't last." "Neither do coffins," she replied. It drew the ghost of a smile from him. small, respectful. He reached for the lid, hefting it as though measuring its weight against his own. "Show me where to fit it." Evelyn hesitated. She had built every box by herself since the day her husband was taken, never trusted another's hands on her work. But there was a steadiness in Jameson's grip, a way he respected the space around the dead wood. She nodded toward the bench. "The edge needs trimming." He worked in silence, and she watched. His movements were careful, deliberate, a man who had learned the worth of precision. When he drew the plane across the board, curls of wood lifted and fell like ribbons of smoke. The sound filled the room. Soft, rhythmic, human. Evelyn found herself breathing in time with it. When the lid fit flush, she fetched the nails. Together they held the wood still while she hammered, 3 strokes per nail, her rhythm met by the faint intake of his breath. The echo ran through the floorboards like the pulse of something buried alive. By noon, the work was done. The coffin stood finished, plain and serviceable. Evelyn ran her hand along the grain, the gesture as intimate as smoothing a child's hair. Jameson wiped his hands on his trousers and looked around the workshop, the narrow shelves of tools, the jars of turpentine, the heap of rags darkened by pitch. "Strange kind of living," he said. "It keeps me fed," she answered, "and it keeps me honest. Death don't care for gossip." He studied her then, really looked. The lines at the corners of her eyes were etched deep, not just from age, but from squinting against too much sun, too much watching. Her hands were thin, strong. There was a mark on her left wrist, 2 faint scars shaped like rope burns. He didn't ask. She didn't explain. The air thickened with afternoon heat. Mercy shifted her weight, tail flicking once, twice. Evelyn stepped outside, bucket in hand, to draw water from the well. The rope creaked, echoing in the stillness. Behind her, Jameson's voice carried low through the open doorway. "You should have someone around," he said. "A woman alone out here's an easy mark." Evelyn set the bucket down, droplets splashing her boots. "I've had marks before," she said. "I'm still standing." He said nothing after that, only watched her pour water into the horse's trough. Mercy bent to drink, muzzle dark with wet clay. Evelyn brushed the mare's mane with slow strokes, untangling the burrs caught there. The smell of animal sweat and dust filled the air. Honest smells, clean in their way. Later, as the sun slanted low, they shared bread hardened at the edges and apples cut into quarters. Jameson told her little of himself, only that he'd worked cattle near the border and hadn't belonged anywhere in years. He spoke without bitterness, as if belonging were a luxury some men simply outgrew. When the light faded, she lit the lamp again. The house glowed amber. Shadows softened the harshness of the tools, the rough edges of the coffin they had built. Jameson sat near the fire, his face drawn but calmer now, the wound clean beneath the shirt she had stitched. Evelyn sat across from him, sharpening a chisel by habit, though there was no work left to do. "You ever think of leaving?" he asked. "There's nowhere to go that isn't just another edge of the desert," she said. He nodded slowly. "Edges are what keep a man from falling off the world." "Or keep him from walking into it," she murmured. The wind picked up again, gentle this time, stirring the coffin nails above the door. Their chiming wove through the quiet, not mournful, but steady. Evelyn looked toward them, then back at the man who had crossed her threshold uninvited, yet somehow not unwelcome. "I don't usually keep company," she said. "I don't usually stay," he replied. Their eyes met over the firelight. Neither looked away first. When the hour grew late, Jameson rose, wincing at the pull in his side. "You mind if I check the mare?" "She's tied safe," Evelyn said. But he was already at the door, pulling his coat on, the movement slow but sure. The sound of the latch echoed after he stepped into the dark. Evelyn sat for a while longer. She could hear him outside, murmuring to the horse, the tone low, soothing, the language of men who had spent more time with beasts than with other souls. She set aside the chisel, extinguished the lamp, and watched the last smoke of its flame curl toward the rafters. The night grew quiet except for the whisper of hooves shifting on dry boards. She thought about how, for the first time in years, another heartbeat had joined hers under this roof. Not as an intrusion, but as a second rhythm. Two slow, uncertain beats, finding a fragile harmony. She lay down at last, the quilt heavy, the air faintly sweet with resin and smoke. Somewhere beyond sleep, she heard Jameson return, the door easing shut, the floor creak once beneath his boots. He paused, as if listening to the house breathe. "Good night, Miss Ward," he said softly. Evelyn didn't answer, not because she hadn't heard, but because silence felt closer to prayer than any word could. Outside, the wind turned in the trees, carrying the smell of pine and distance. The coffin they had built stood by the wall, lid closed, nails gleaming faint in the dark. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt no need to light the candle she usually burned for the dead. The living had finally found their way inside. By the third morning, the sun had hardened again, burning through the pale wash of dawn like a coin dropped in water. The smell of dust returned, dry as flour, and the world outside seemed to hum with the low fatigue of heat. Evelyn stood at the window, the hem of her work dress brushing her boots, watching the land shimmer. She had not spoken much since breakfast. Jameson, sensing that silence meant steadiness in her, let it be. He had taken to mending her fence, driving nails into the warped slats that bordered the small patch of yard behind the house. The sound of hammering drifted through the open door, slow and patient. Every strike seemed to echo the rhythm of the days they had begun to share. Measured, necessary, nothing wasted. Around mid-morning, a rider appeared on the horizon, a small black shape against the light. Evelyn narrowed her eyes, the habit of someone who had learned long ago to see trouble before it reached her gate. The sound of hooves grew distinct, carrying the dull clop of business, not neighborliness. When the horse stopped, the dust rose high enough to swallow the rider for a breath. Then a man dismounted, wearing a vest too fine for this edge of the desert, and boots polished within an inch of their honesty. He carried a satchel tucked under his arm, the leather creaking. His face was pale and narrow, lips pressed like a man who bit lemons for a living. "Miss Ward?" he asked. Evelyn stepped onto the porch, eyes level. "You found her." He dipped his head in the smallest show of courtesy. "I bring notice from the county registrar. Concerns the estate of Elijah Ward." Her father's name hung between them, strange and weightless. She had not heard it spoken in years. The sound felt like someone setting down a heavy box and waiting for her to lift it again. Jameson had stopped his work, hammer hanging loosely in his hand. He watched from a few yards away, his expression unreadable. Evelyn took the folded paper, its edge crackling like dry bark. The seal was smudged from the courier's thumb. "What's this?" she asked. "Your father's debt," the man said. "Years old. Finally called." Evelyn stared at the lines of writing, black and thin, crawling over the page like ants. The words meant numbers, and the numbers meant land. She read them again, slower, the sweat from her fingers smearing the ink. "This can't be right," she said quietly. He had nothing to borrow. The man cleared his throat, the sound neat and efficient. "The records are clear. If payment isn't met within 30 days, the property reverts to county possession. I'll take your mark here for receipt." He handed her a small pencil. She did not take it. Behind her, the wind lifted the coffin nails above the door, making their faint, bright music. It sounded thin in the daylight, fragile. Evelyn folded the notice, tucked it under her arm, and stepped back. "You'll get no mark from me until I speak with the registrar himself." The man offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Suit yourself, but the law don't listen to ghosts." He swung into his saddle and turned his horse with a jerk of the reins. The dust followed him down the road like a curse. When he was gone, Evelyn looked at the folded paper again. The seal broke in her hand. She unfolded it and read it a third time, though the words hadn't changed. Jameson came closer, the hammer still in his hand. "Trouble?" he asked. "Debt," she said. "Says my father owed money. I reckon they've waited till they figured I'd be too tired to fight." Jameson's eyes moved over the page, taking in the figures. "You can fight," he said. Evelyn gave a dry laugh, small and bitter. "Fight who? Men who don't even need to look me in the eye to take what's left?" She went back inside. The house felt smaller with the paper in her hand. She placed it on the table beside the lamp and stood staring at it, as if it might start talking. Jameson followed, standing just inside the door. "You've got 30 days, he said. 30 days for what? To find money in the dust? She ran her hand over her hair, pushing the curls back from her forehead. The only thing I've got is lumber and time, and they've already taken both. Jameson leaned against the wall, the shadow of his frame cutting across the floor. You could sell something. There's nothing left worth buying. The conversation ended there. Evelyn turned away, pulled on her gloves, and set to sanding a new plank she'd started that morning. The movement was rougher than it needed to be, but it kept her from shaking. The rasp of sandpaper filled the air, sharp and steady, drowning out thought. By afternoon, the light had turned cruel. Jameson had retreated to the porch, working at his side with the precision of a man fixing something that couldn't stay fixed. Evelyn worked straight through, the sweat darkening the back of her dress, the plank beneath her hands turning smooth as bone. When she finally stopped, the paper still lay where she'd left it. She picked it up again, reading until the letters blurred. The edge of the page caught the light of the lamp, bright and thin as a blade. "What happens if they come back?" Jameson asked from the doorway. "Then I'll be gone before they find me," she said without looking up. He frowned. "You'd leave your home?" Evelyn's voice softened. "It's just boards and nails, same as the rest." Jameson stepped closer, his boots slow on the wood floor. "A house keeps more than its own weight," he said. "If you run, it won't stop chasing you." She turned to face him. "And if I stay? Then maybe the chase ends here." The words sat between them, heavy with something that neither dared call hope. Night came early. The sky turned the color of coal dust. Evelyn lit the lamp again, the glow trembling over the walls. She unfolded the debt notice once more, setting it near the flame. The ink shimmered in the light. Her hands hovered over it, the way one might hover over an old wound. Jameson stood at the window, looking out across the graves. "Your father," he said after a while. "He leave you this place?" "He left me work," she said. "The land came with it." "You miss him?" Evelyn hesitated, then shook her head. "Missing's a luxury for the living. I reckon he's got no need of it now." Jameson turned from the window. "I know about owing things," he said. "Men, places, ghosts, they all collect in their own time." She looked up at him, her eyes catching the lamplight. "And you paid them all?" "No," he said. "Just stopped running." Evelyn let the paper fall to the table. It landed beside the lamp, curling at the edges from the heat. She reached out and pressed it flat again. Her voice was quieter now, almost to herself. 30 days. That's a long time to watch something you love disappear. Outside, Mercy pawed the ground, restless. Jameson went to calm her, leaving Evelyn with the lamp and the paper. The flame bent low in the draft from the door. She took a deep breath, and for the first time in years, she felt the shape of tears gathering behind her eyes, though none came. When Jameson returned, he found her sitting at the table, the lamp still burning, the debt notice laid open beside an untouched cup of coffee. "You should sleep," he said. "I should," she murmured. "But morning keeps coming, whether I'm ready or not." He pulled out the chair across from her and sat. They said nothing more. The nails above the door stirred faintly in the night wind, their soft, metallic song threading through the room. It was not a sad sound, nor hopeful, just the steady truth of air passing through what had once held the dead. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment. The fire's light flickered across her face, drawing her features in gold and shadow. "If the land goes," she said, "I'll lose them all. My father, my mother. Every grave I ever tended." Jameson leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Then we'll find a way," he said. "You built coffins. Build a plan." Evelyn opened her eyes. The faintest smile touched her mouth. Thin, uncertain, but alive. "You talk like a man who's seen miracles." "I've just seen people who refused to die before they had to." She looked at him then, long enough to see that he meant it. The paper between them fluttered in the draft, the inked words dancing like something already fading. Evelyn reached out, folded it once more, and slid it beneath the lamp's base, pinning it down. The silence that followed was not heavy this time. It was the kind of silence that waits for the next breath, the next move. Outside, the wind began again, brushing against the window with the dry whisper of sand. The chime above the door rang once, twice, and settled. Evelyn rose, banked the fire, and turned toward her room. "You'll need rest, too," she said. "I'll keep watch," he answered. She didn't argue. As she disappeared into the dim hallway, the lamp caught the edges of her hair, haloing it for a moment before she vanished from sight. Jameson remained at the table, his eyes on the paper. He didn't touch it. He didn't need to. The promise of it, debt, loss, and the small, stubborn spark of defiance was already written in both their lives. The hour deepened. Outside, something shifted in the wind, a sound like footsteps moving across the dry yard. Jameson's hand fell to the revolver at his belt, a habit older than rest. But it was only the night, walking past the house, carrying their worries toward the hills. He let his hand drop, leaned back in the chair, and listened to the chime whisper itself to sleep. By the time the fourth dawn rolled across Silver Mesa, the sky looked bleached, the color of old linen stretched thin over bone. Heat had not yet risen, but the air already carried that faint metallic scent that promised another ruthless day. Evelyn woke to the sound of soft hooves shifting outside, steady, familiar, and wrong in its rhythm. She pulled on her boots and stepped out onto the porch. Mercy stood near the fence line, her head low, flank dark with sweat, though the morning was cool. Jameson knelt beside her, one hand on her shoulder, the other tracing the mare's breathing ribs. The look on his face told Evelyn everything before a word left his mouth. "She went down once," he said quietly. "I thought it was the heat, but she won't take water now." Evelyn crouched beside him, touching Mercy's nose. The skin was hot and dry, nostrils trembling with effort. The horse's eyes rolled once, showing the thin white rim of fear animals get when they know. Evelyn had seen it before, mules collapsing on the road, cattle fading in drought. But this was different. Mercy wasn't just an animal. She was the only thing Jameson had carried with him that still breathed. "She's been traveling too long," Evelyn said. Jameson nodded, his jaw tight. "She's given me more miles than I earned." Evelyn stood, wiping her palms on her skirt. "We can wet her mouth. Maybe she'll drink." He didn't move. "It's time," he said. The stillness that followed pressed against the air. The wind chime above the porch trembled once, as if the world had exhaled and decided to hold its breath. When the sun lifted, Evelyn brought the shovel. Jameson took it from her without a word. They walked behind the house, to the small rise that held her father's grave. The soil there was dry and stubborn, clinging to the blade. Each thrust sounded like a sigh. Evelyn watched him work, his body bending and straightening in rhythm with the strike of the shovel. He didn't look up once. When the hole was deep enough, Jameson returned to the horse. He whispered something into Mercy's ear, words too soft for Evelyn to hear, and then he led her slowly up the hill. The mare stumbled once, knees shaking, but she followed. Evelyn held the reins when his hands began to tremble. At the edge of the grave, Mercy stopped. She turned her head, pressed her muzzle against Jameson's chest. He laid his forehead against her and breathed her in, the smell of dust and sun, and the faint sweetness of hay long gone. "I won't have her suffer," he said. Evelyn nodded. She had seen that mercy too, the hardest kind, the one that asked you to love enough to end pain. Jameson unholstered his revolver. The sound of the hammer cocking was too clean, too small for what it meant. He looked once toward Evelyn, as if to ask permission. She gave it with her eyes. The shot cracked through the air, sharp as breaking glass. Mercy folded where she stood, the fall slow and quiet, her body settling like a wave collapsing on itself. For a long time, neither of them moved. Jameson knelt again, placing his palm over her eye until it closed. Then he began to shovel. Evelyn joined him without asking. Dirt thudded against hide, dull and final. Sweat ran down her back. Dust rose around them, clinging to her tears before they could fall. When it was done, she brought a small wooden cross from her workshop. Jameson took it, pressed it into the ground, and tied one of Mercy's old reins around it. The wind caught the leather, making it flutter. "She carried you far," Evelyn said. He looked at the grave. "Further than I deserved." The words came rough, torn from someplace deep. Evelyn didn't answer. She only set her hand on his shoulder, a light, solid weight. For the first time, he didn't flinch from the touch. They stood until the shadows shortened, until the heat began to bite. The grave looked raw, a wound stitched in dirt. Evelyn noticed how the sun hit the metal buckle on the rein, throwing a single spark of light toward her father's headstone. She didn't believe in signs, but the coincidence made her chest ache anyway. When they walked back to the house, Jameson went straight to the basin, scrubbing his hands with cold water until the dust turned the water red. Evelyn watched him from the doorway. There was no blood on him, but something else was gone now. The taut edge of a man always ready to leave. "You'll want rest," she said. He shook his head. "Work'll do better." So she gave him work. Together they carried planks to repair the roof over her shed, where rain had been leaking through. He moved slower than before, each motion careful, deliberate. The sun climbed high, the air shimmering. Every sound seemed to come from a long way off. The creak of wood, the clang of the hammer, the occasional cry of a hawk circling overhead. By the time the light softened, the repairs were done. They sat on the porch, the boards under them still warm. Evelyn poured water into 2 tin cups. Jameson took his, holding it between his palms. "Thank you," he said after a while. "For what?" "For letting me bury her near something that mattered." Evelyn looked toward the hill. The cross stood outlined against the sky, small and steadfast. "It mattered to you," she said. "That's enough." He turned the cup in his hands. "She was all I had left that wasn't broken." "You'll find other things," she said. He smiled faintly, the expression slow, like someone learning how again. "Maybe. But some pieces don't fit new places." The wind picked up, dry and restless. The coffin nails above the door began their faint, metallic singing again. Evelyn tilted her head toward the sound. "Those always make that noise?" he asked. "When the wind's honest," she said. "It reminds me I'm still here to hear it." They sat without speaking for a long time. The sun bled out across the mesa, turning the dust into a sea of copper light. The graves on the hill caught the last of it, shining like small fires. Evelyn felt the ache of the day settle in her bones. Heavy, but not cruel. Beside her, Jameson's shoulders eased, the weight of grief finding a place to rest. As darkness came, she stood and lit the lantern. "You should eat," she said. He didn't move right away. His gaze stayed on the hill. "I've buried men," he said softly, "but never something that waited for me to come home." Evelyn paused at the doorway. "Maybe now you'll stay long enough to be waited for." He looked at her then, the lantern's glow painting his face in amber and shadow. Whatever answer he might have given caught in his throat. He only nodded once. Inside, the house smelled of pine and smoke. Evelyn ladled stew into 2 bowls, set them on the table. When he came in, he paused at the threshold again, as though every time he crossed that line, the world redrew itself. They ate quietly. The rhythm of spoons against bowls filled the small room. Outside, the wind softened, and the chime fell silent, finally tired of singing. Later, when she banked the fire, and he stretched out on the floor where he had first slept, Evelyn lingered by the window. The moon had risen, pale and cold. It touched the edge of the new grave, turning the leather rain into a silver line. She whispered, "Rest easy, girl." And though her voice was meant for the dead horse, something in it reached the man lying near the fire. Jameson opened his eyes in the dark. He didn't speak, but his hand closed loosely around the brim of his hat, the gesture soft, almost reverent. Outside, the wind moved again, carrying dust over Mercy's resting place. The sound of it brushing across the dry grass was like breath released, slow and forgiving. It began with a sound so soft, Evelyn almost mistook it for her own breath. A faint hiss, like paper tearing far away. Then the air changed. The smell first, sharp and clean. And the roof, so long used to silence, gave a hollow thrum. Rain. She stepped out onto the porch, the wood beneath her bare feet cool, the horizon blurred in a haze of silver. The sky had cracked open after weeks of waiting. The first drops hit the dust and vanished, swallowed whole. The second ones stayed. She closed her eyes, letting them mark her face, her throat, the hollow of her collar. Jameson was still by the shed, oiling the saddle he'd refused to sell after Mercy's death. The rain spattered his hat and shoulders, streaking down the old leather until it looked alive again. He didn't move to shelter. When he saw Evelyn standing bareheaded in the downpour, he just said, "You'll catch cold." "I'm already cold," she answered, not turning. He laughed once, quiet. The sound drifted through the rain like something half-remembered. Then he walked toward her, slow and deliberate. By the time he reached the porch, she was soaked through. Her dress clung to her shins, her hair heavy against her neck. He handed her a rag from his pocket, the edges frayed. She didn't take it. Instead, she looked up at him. Really looked. The rain had washed the lines of road dust from his face, revealing a man younger than the miles he carried. "They'll call this a mercy too," she said, voice half lost in the rain. He followed her gaze toward the horizon. The fields shimmered, each blade of grass bowed under its small burden of water. "Maybe it is," he said. "Something kind, finally." Evelyn reached out, palm up. The rain gathered there, a small, trembling pool. "It'll ruin the paper," she murmured. "What paper?" She didn't answer, just turned and stepped back inside. The air was damp and cool, the smell of wet wood filling the narrow space. On the table sat the folded debt notice, edges curling from the heat of the lamp 2 nights before. She lifted it, holding it up between them. "This," she said. "The thing that says none of this is mine." Jameson took a step closer. The drops from his hat brim splattered onto the floor. "Give it here." "No," she said softly. "It's mine to lose." He reached out slowly, but she shook her head. Instead, she walked to the hearth, where the fire had burned low, and held the paper above the last coal's glow. "Evelyn, if the rain's washing everything clean, let it finish the job." The flame caught the edge, a curl of light running up the paper like a fuse. She dropped it into the firebox, and the ash rose with a whisper. For a moment, neither of them moved. The rain hammered the roof in waves, and the wind drove a thin spray through the cracks, misting the walls. "You'll need that notice," Jameson said finally. "What for? So the county can measure what's left?" "It's proof." "I don't need proof, I need peace." He didn't argue. He just stood there, watching the glow fade to embers. The sound of rain filled every space between them. After a while, Evelyn went to the door again. Outside, the ground had turned dark, almost black. Little rivers were forming along the steps, carving their own way down the slope. The air shimmered with that smell. Earth waking after too long a sleep. "You ever seen it rain like this?" she asked. "Once," he said. "Years back, near Tucson. Thought the sky was giving back what it took." "Did it?" He looked out into the curtain of water. For a while, lightning flashed, a wide white sheet. Then thunder followed close, the kind that shivers through bone. Evelyn flinched. Jameson moved without thinking, placing a hand on her shoulder. She didn't pull away. They stood that way, shoulder to shoulder, the storm's pulse echoing inside the small house. "I can't pay what I owe," she said finally, her voice low but steady. "Not in money, not in anything they'd take." "Maybe what's owed ain't to them." "To who then?" He hesitated. "The living." The rain softened, shifting from roar to whisper. Evelyn stepped down into it, bare feet sinking into the cool mud. She lifted her hands, palms open, and the water rolled over her skin, streaking away the pitch and sawdust that had lived there for years. Jameson watched, something like awe flickering across his face. When she turned back toward him, her eyes were darker, the color of the wet soil itself. "You said once you stopped running," she said. "Does that mean you stopped hiding too?" He didn't answer. The look he gave her was enough. Shame and something stronger fighting for space. "You could tell me," she said quietly. "Whatever it is that follows you." He shook his head. "Not tonight." "Then when? When the rain stops?" She gave a small nod. That would have to do. By late afternoon, the storm eased, leaving the air cool and alive. The rainwater had pooled in the low ground near the graves. The wooden crosses gleamed, darker than before. Evelyn walked among them, checking each one, pressing the damp soil back around their bases. Jameson followed at a distance. When she reached Mercy's grave, she stopped. The leather rein tied to the cross had soaked through, heavy, its buckle glinting faintly. "She'd have liked the rain," Evelyn said. "She'd have run through it till she dropped." Evelyn smiled faintly. "I suppose some things don't learn to rest easy." Jameson looked at her, the light of the fading storm laying a soft halo on her shoulders. "And you?" he asked. "Do you rest easy?" "I used to think quiet was peace," she said. "Now I'm not so sure." He crouched beside the grave, pressing his palm into the wet soil. When he lifted it, the earth clung to his skin. "Maybe peace ain't stillness," he said. "Maybe it's knowing you can start again." She studied him, the mud drying along his wrist, the weariness behind his words. "You talk like a man who's seen too many endings." He met her eyes. "And you talk like a woman who stopped believing in beginnings." Neither spoke after that. The evening slipped in, cool and quiet. Frogs had woken in the creek somewhere beyond the field, their calls strange in a land unaccustomed to such voices. Evelyn turned toward the house, her skirt brushing wet grass. The smell of rain clung to her. Inside, she lit the lantern. The walls glowed, their old roughness softened. Jameson hung his hat by the door, where the wind chime had gone still. He said, "That paper, you sure you're ready for what comes next?" She looked at the fireplace, at the small curl of ash that had once been her debt. "For the first time, yes," she said. He nodded. The air between them was full, heavy with words unspoken. Outside, A last drop fell from the roof, striking the porch with a soft tick, like punctuation to an ending neither of them wanted to name. When Evelyn went to her room, Jameson stayed by the dying fire. He watched the embers dim, then leaned forward, stirred them once, and sat back. His reflection flickered in the window pane. Two versions of himself, one lit, one fading. He whispered to the empty air, "You were right, Mercy. She'll save me before she even knows it." Then he leaned his head back against the wall, listening to the rain's memory as it trickled from the eaves. Upstairs, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She lay on her side, eyes on the window. Beyond the glass, the sky was clear again, washed clean. For a long time she watched it, breathing in rhythm with the slow drip outside. And when she finally drifted into dreams, it was with the scent of rain and the faint echo of a man's voice promising something he didn't yet understand. The rain left the world smelling new for 2 days, then drifted off toward the horizon like a promise too light to hold. Silver Mesa dried slowly. Puddles turned to mirrors, and then to dust again. The creek's chatter quieted until it was only a memory. Evelyn had opened the shutters, letting light flood through the narrow rooms. The house, long used to shadow, looked uncertain beneath the sudden brightness. Jameson had gone early to the small trading post beyond the ridge, saying the fence needed more wire. She'd watched him ride away on a borrowed mule, the leather of his coat dark with dew. The land stretched after him like an old sheet, smooth and bare. For a moment she'd felt something odd. Worry, maybe, or the ghost of it, before turning back inside. By noon, the heat had crept back into the valley. Evelyn spent the hours mending a split drawer in the cupboard. She'd just set the chisel down when she heard hoofbeats. Not one set, but several. They came fast, throwing dust ahead of them, the kind of pace no friend ever brought. 3 riders broke over the rise, their coats faded union blue, faces burned to leather. The lead man, thin, sharp-eyed, dismounted before the horse even stopped. He tipped his hat just enough to make the gesture an insult. "Afternoon, miss," he said. "Name's Bishop. Looking for a man been calling himself Jameson Cole." Evelyn leaned against the doorframe, her hand steady on the lintel. "You've found only me," she said. Bishop smiled, a thin twist of lips. "He's a tall one, gray eyes, rides a bay mare. Though word is he's down 1 horse lately. You seen anyone fits that?" "No," she said, and the lie came easy. Bishop glanced past her, shoulder into the dim interior. "Mind if we take a look?" "I do." The 2 men behind him chuckled, low, rough. Bishop didn't. "You got a reputation for being particular," he said. "Townfolk told us as much. Told us you live with ghosts." "I live alone." He nodded, pretending to accept it. "You see, ma'am, this man we're after, he's wanted for desertion and for a killing that happened after. We just want to bring him in, give the law a chance to say what's right." Evelyn met his eyes. "And what's right mean to you?" "It means he hangs instead of wanders free." The wind stirred behind her, brushing the hanging chime. Its sound sliced the air like a blade drawn slow. Bishop's gaze flicked up to it, then back to her. "You got a strange way of decorating," he said. "Coffin nails?" "Reminders," she answered. He studied her face another beat, then swung into his saddle. "If he shows, you tell him Bishop's coming. Tell him the army don't forget." He tugged the reins, and the horses turned, hooves clattering down the dry road until they blurred into heat haze. Evelyn stayed at the door long after they were gone. The dust they'd raised drifted across the yard like a veil. She touched the chime gently to still it, then went back inside. The silence that followed had a weight she hadn't felt since before the rain. When Jameson returned at dusk, his shirt streaked with dirt and wire coiled over his shoulder, she was waiting. He stopped short at her face. "What happened?" "Men came," she said. "3 of them. Said your name. Said you ran from the army and left a man dead behind you." He dropped the coil, the wire unspooling across the porch. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then he sat on the step, elbows on his knees, eyes on the horizon gone orange with sunset. "It's true," he said finally. Evelyn's breath caught, though she hadn't known what answer she expected. "The war was over," he continued. "At least that's what they told us. But there was still killing, raids, revenge, things with no sides left to stand on. I was ordered to shoot a farmer caught taking water from our well. He had a child watching. I didn't. My captain did. Said I'd lost my nerve. Later, when he slept, I made sure he'd never wake to give another order. They called it murder. Maybe it was." Evelyn looked down at her hands, clean and trembling. "And you ran?" "I buried the child first," he said. "Then I ran." The light faded, pulling the color from everything. Evelyn sat beside him, close enough that their knees brushed. The air between them was heavy with dust and confession. "They'll come back," she said. "I know." "What will you do?" "What I've always done," he said, then looked at her. "Unless you tell me not to." She shook her head. "I'm not your judge. Maybe I need one." Evelyn's voice softened. "We all do. But judgment don't fix a thing. It just names it." They sat until the last light disappeared. When darkness came, she rose and lit the lamp. The flame cast long shadows on the walls. Jameson remained on the step, hat in his hands, the posture of a man trying to measure what was left of his life. She spoke from the doorway. "You can stay, but if you do, you'll have to stop waiting for punishment." He looked up. "You think it's that simple?" "No," she said. "But it's a start." He stood, the motion slow. "And what if I bring trouble to your door?" "It's already been here," she said. That night, the house felt smaller. The air held the scent of rain gone stale, the boards still damp in their joints. Evelyn lay awake, listening to Jameson's restless movements downstairs, the floor creaking, a chair scraped soft against wood. Sometime past midnight, she heard the chime stir again. In the morning, he was gone. The mule stood tethered, its reins hanging loose. A trail of footprints led toward the ridge, swallowed by distance. Evelyn felt the absence like a hollow in her chest. She went to the porch, sat with the morning sun on her back, and waited. He returned at sunset, the same color as the dust he carried. "They're camped a mile out," he said. 3 men. Same ones?" She nodded. "I could ride tonight, draw them off." "You could," she said. "Or you could stay and see if the wind changes." He looked at her, brow furrowed. "And if it doesn't? Then we'll bury more than one thing on that hill." A half smile tugged at his mouth. "You talk like someone who's already chosen her side." "I did, years ago," she said. "The day I learned silence ain't the same as safety." He studied her face, then the yard beyond her shoulder. "You're not afraid?" "I am," she said simply. "But fear's only a story till it ends." They went inside. The lamp flickered to life once more. Jameson leaned his rifle against the wall, his hat beside it. Outside, the first stars appeared, cold and bright. The air had the hush of something waiting to break. As she turned the lock, Evelyn caught his reflection in the window glass. Eyes sharp, jaw set, a man torn between staying and fleeing. She thought how every person she'd ever met had been shaped by what they ran from, but some were lucky enough to find a place where running no longer worked. That night, neither of them spoke of the riders. They ate in silence, their spoons scraping against tin. When the fire burned low, Jameson went to the window again. The dark stretched out like a living thing. He listened. Somewhere far off, a horse snorted. Evelyn set her hand on the table, palm open. "If they come," she said, "we'll meet them together." He looked at her, that same steady quiet she'd seen the first night they met. "You're sure?" She nodded once. "You buried your past beside my father's grave. Seems fitting to defend it too." He gave a single breath of laughter, rough and low. "You're a hard woman to leave behind." "Then don't," she said. The house fell silent again. Outside, a wind rose, thin, high, the kind that makes fences moan. The chime above the door began to ring, not mournful this time, but sharp, defiant. It filled the room like the start of something neither of them yet understood. Jameson reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers for the briefest second. She didn't pull away. The touch was enough, like the pause between a heartbeat and the next. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a wolf howled. Jameson's eyes lifted toward the sound. "Tomorrow," he said, "might come early." Evelyn met his gaze. "Then we'll be ready." The lamplight flickered once, caught between shadow and flame, then steadied. The morning broke thin and gray, the kind of dawn that felt more like a pause than a beginning. Evelyn woke before the first light, hearing Jameson's footsteps on the porch. He hadn't slept, she knew. The boards creaked under his slow pacing, the sound of a man caught between roads. She dressed quietly, pulling on her worn shawl, and stepped outside. The air was still, heavy with the scent of damp earth. The graves on the hill shimmered faintly, their wooden markers darkened by dew. Jameson stood there, hat in hand, looking toward the horizon where the ridge cut the sky. "They're still out there," he said, without turning. Evelyn followed his gaze. No riders were visible, only a faint column of dust that hadn't yet decided which way to travel. "You could leave now," she said. "They'd lose your trail before midday." "I know. But you won't." He glanced at her then, a ghost of a smile on his lips. "I've done enough running. Besides, they'll come here whether I'm standing or gone. Might as well be standing." Evelyn nodded. "Then we'll be 2 against 3. Seems poor odds. I've lived on worse." They walked together toward the hill. The soil was damp underfoot, the color of rust. Jameson carried the shovel. Evelyn carried nothing, her hands free and still. When they reached Mercy's grave, he began to dig again, not to bury, but to make space beside it. "What are you doing?" she asked. He didn't answer at first. The shovel struck the earth in slow, steady motions. When he paused, breathing hard, he said, "If I fall today, I don't want to lie where men like Bishop can find me. I'll rest here, with something that never judged me." Evelyn's breath caught. "Don't talk like that." He kept digging. A man's got to prepare for the part of life that stays still. She wanted to stop him, to take the shovel away, but something in his eyes told her not to. Instead, she knelt and brushed her hand over Mercy's cross, the leather rein tied there soft from rain. When the hole was deep enough, Jameson leaned on the shovel, sweat streaking his neck despite the chill. "You think there's peace in the ground?" he asked. "There's peace in being remembered," she said, "even by one person." He nodded once, like that was enough. Then he drove the shovel into the dirt and left it standing, a blade waiting for wind. By mid-morning, the sound of hooves rose again, faint at first, then clearer, the rhythm of men who rode with purpose. Evelyn went inside, lit the lamp though the sun was up, and placed her father's old rifle on the table. It hadn't been fired in years, but the metal still gleamed when she wiped it clean. Jameson checked his revolver, spinning the chamber once before snapping it shut. The motion was calm, practiced, almost gentle. "They'll come soon," he said. Evelyn looked up from the rifle. "I won't hide." "I didn't ask you to." Outside, the wind shifted, pushing the dust eastward. The air grew thick with silence, the kind that comes before storms or reckonings. Evelyn stood by the window, her reflection faint in the glass. She saw Jameson's shadow beside hers. Taller, broader, a shape that somehow made hers look steadier. Then the first rider appeared on the ridge. Bishop, unmistakable in his straight-backed posture, a glint of brass at his belt. The other two followed, spreading wide like hunters circling prey. Jameson stepped out onto the porch, one hand resting loosely on his gun. Evelyn followed, rifle in both hands. The sun caught on the coffin nails above the door, and for an instant they shone like a crown. Bishop pulled his horse to a stop a dozen paces away. "You should have kept riding, Cole," he called. "Would have spared this woman trouble she don't need." "She doesn't need your kind of help," Jameson said. Bishop smirked. "We'll see about that." One of the men flanked left, the other right. Evelyn's heart hammered, but she didn't move. Jameson's voice stayed low and even. "You want me?" he said. "Let her be." "She's harboring a fugitive," Bishop said. "That makes her guilty too." Evelyn lifted the rifle, sight steady despite the tremor in her arm. "You'll have to get through me first." Bishop laughed, the sound harsh and short. "You'd shoot a soldier?" "Not twice," she said. The laughter died. A standoff held the air still. The horses stamped, snorted, shifting uneasily. Jameson took one step down from the porch, hand hovering near his holster. Bishop's eyes flicked to the movement, and in that breath of time, the world snapped. One of the men to the right reached for his gun, but before the steel cleared leather, Jameson fired. The shot cracked like thunder. The rider toppled sideways, hitting the dust hard. The second man froze, his weapon half drawn. Bishop swore, raising his pistol. Evelyn didn't think. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder, the sound splitting the air. Bishop's hat flew off as the bullet tore through the brim, grazing his temple. For a heartbeat, no one breathed. Then Bishop shouted, clutching the wound, blood running down his cheek. "You'll hang for that, both of you!" He turned his horse hard, galloping back toward the ridge. The remaining man followed, dragging the wounded one's reins. Within moments, the sound of hooves faded into distance. Evelyn lowered the rifle, her hands shaking. Jameson stepped to her side, taking it gently from her. "You all right?" She nodded. though her breath came in gasps. "I didn't mean to kill." "You didn't," he said. "But you would have, if you had to. That's the difference between surviving and waiting to die." She sank onto the step, trembling. He crouched beside her, wiping the dust from her cheek with the back of his hand. His fingers left streaks of dirt and blood, neither knowing whose it was. "What now?" she whispered. "They'll be back. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe not. But they'll think twice before coming for you." She looked toward the hill, where Mercy's grave caught the slant of light. "And you?" "I'll stay till you tell me to go." "I won't." He smiled faintly, relief flickering across his face like sunlight on water. Then he stood, stretching his sore shoulders, and walked to the edge of the yard. The shovel still stood where he'd left it, blade buried in the earth. He pulled it free and set it upright beside the porch. "No use digging today," he said. "Seems we're both still breathing." Evelyn laughed once, the sound thin but real. The tension broke like a string finally let go. She leaned her head against the porch post, eyes closed, and for the first time in days, felt the smallest sliver of safety. As evening fell, she cooked what little was left, cornbread and dried beans, and they ate on the steps, their shoulders nearly touching. The wind had softened again, carrying the smell of damp soil and smoke. When the meal was done, Jameson rose and walked toward the graves. She watched him kneel, his silhouette framed against the rising moon. He reached into his coat and drew out a small iron horseshoe, its edge rusted, the nail holes worn smooth. "What's that?" she called. "Mercy's shoe," he said. "The last one she threw." He pressed it into the earth beside the grave, patting the soil down with his palm. The moonlight caught on the metal, turning it to a faint circle of light. Evelyn joined him, kneeling beside him in the cool dirt. "Why here?" "Because promises should be buried where they can grow," he said quietly. "This one's for you." She didn't answer. Instead, she reached out and set her hand over his in the soil. The contact was brief, but the warmth of it lingered. When they stood again, the valley was silent. The air smelled of rain that wasn't coming yet, of dust and wood smoke, and something new. Hope, maybe, though neither would dare to name it. Back at the porch, Evelyn looked once more toward the ridge. The stars were bright and sharp. "They'll keep riding," she said. "They will," he agreed. "But so will we." And when they stepped inside, closing the door against the night, the chime above it sang. Not from wind, but from the small tremor of the door settling into its frame. The soft sound of peace trying to find its way home. The next morning came quiet, wrapped in a mist that softened every line of the valley. The air smelled of wet ash and faint wild sage, and the hills that had burned with anger the day before now looked washed clean, as if even the land had decided to begin again. Evelyn opened the door and let the gray light spill in. For a long time she stood there, watching the fog drift low across the graves. Behind her, Jameson stirred. He moved stiffly, his arm bound where the rifle's recoil had bruised him. When their eyes met, he offered a small nod, the kind that passed for a smile in his language. "They didn't come back," she said. "No," he answered. "They won't. Bishop won't risk another fight. He'll call it justice served and ride home to tell a story that makes him sound brave." Evelyn's hand rested on the door frame, her fingers tracing the grain. "And what story will you tell?" He shrugged. None worth repeating. She turned toward him then, the mist making her curls cling to her forehead. You stayed. He met her gaze steadily. I said I would. They shared the silence between them, thick and tender as the fog itself. Outside, a bird called once, a long, clear whistle that seemed to stretch into the heart of the valley. Later, when the mist thinned, they walked out together to where the soil still showed the scars of yesterday's fight. The ground bore the hoof marks of frightened horses, the faint scuff of boots, the single dark patch where a bullet had found dust instead of flesh. Jameson stooped to brush his fingers over it. Funny, he said. How much noise dying makes, and how quiet staying alive can be. Evelyn glanced at him. You planning on doing much of either? He smiled, just enough to ease the question. I figure I'll rest while I can. They walked to Mercy's grave. The iron horseshoe he'd planted the night before was half buried now, gleaming faintly through the damp earth. Beside it, the leather rein had stiffened, curling like a dried leaf. Evelyn knelt and pressed her hand flat over the mound. You think she's found peace? She asked. Jameson looked toward the horizon, where the first color of sunrise bled into the fog. If there's such a thing, she earned it. Evelyn's voice dropped to a whisper. And you? He hesitated. Maybe I'll borrow some of hers. They returned to the house as the day unfolded. Slow, careful, each step a small ceremony. The damage from the fight was visible now. A broken porch rail, a cracked window, bullet splinters in the post. Jameson started repairs without a word, and Evelyn joined him. He replaced the rail while she swept away the glass. The rhythm of their work merged with the sounds of the valley, the steady creak of boards, the hum of wind through open fields. There was no hurry in it, just movement, just two lives relearning what it meant to stay. When the sun climbed high, Evelyn went inside to cook. The kitchen smelled of cornmeal and coffee, the scent curling through the rooms like a soft hand. Jameson came in to wash his hands at the basin, the water running brown with dust. He glanced at the table, and then at her. You don't owe me breakfast, he said. It's not a debt, she replied. It's habit. He chuckled softly, shaking the water from his hands. Haven't had one of those in a while. They ate together, sitting opposite each other at the table that had once belonged to her father. The light through the repaired window fell across the wood, bright and gold. Evelyn watched the dust motes drift in the beam, rising and falling like slow breath. Afterward, Jameson stepped to the window, looking out toward the ridge. The world stretched wide, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel chased by it. Evelyn joined him, her shoulder brushing his. You'll go someday, she said. He shook his head. Not yet. You don't have to promise. I'm not. Promises are for men who doubt themselves. He turned toward her then, his voice quieter. I just know where I belong today. That's enough. The simplicity of it struck her deeper than any vow could have. She reached up, brushed a streak of dust from his cheek with her thumb. The gesture startled them both. He caught her wrist lightly, holding it a second longer than he should have, then let go. Evelyn looked down, smiling faintly. You'll track mud across my floor. I'll sweep it after, he said. The afternoon stretched long and easy. He fixed the hinge on the barn door, humming under his breath. She mended a torn shirt at the table, the sound of her needle tapping like a heartbeat. Outside, the valley shimmered with new color, greens pushing through the brown, a few wild flowers daring the dry earth to hold them. By dusk, the air cooled again. They sat on the porch steps, watching the last light pull itself across the hills. The sky turned from gold to rose to the deep blue of memory. Evelyn leaned against the post, arms folded. "You ever think about what comes after?" she asked. Jameson considered. "After what?" "After the work. After the fear. After all the running." He thought a moment before answering. "Maybe it's not about what comes after. Maybe it's about who you share the quiet with when the noise finally dies." Evelyn turned to him, the last of the sunlight painting her face. "And who do you share yours with?" He met her eyes, steady. "Right now? You." The air seemed to pause. Then the wind rose, soft but sure, setting the chime above the door to ringing again. The nails struck each other lightly, their music delicate, almost playful now, no longer mourning the dead. Evelyn smiled, a real one this time, not the guarded curve she'd worn for years. "You hear that?" she said. "Yeah," he whispered. "Sounds like the world's still turning." When darkness fell, they went inside. The fire crackled in the hearth, throwing small bursts of light across the walls. Jameson sat near it, mending the strap of his saddle with new thread. Evelyn poured 2 mugs of coffee and handed him one. "Warm enough?" she asked. "More than I was yesterday." She nodded, settling across from him. The firelight caught the faint gleam of the iron horseshoe he'd brought inside earlier. It hung now above the mantel, a ring of rust turned to gold by the flame. Hours later, when she rose to put out the lamps, he stopped her with a quiet voice. "Evelyn." She turned. "You ever think the world gives people a second try?" She studied him in the dim light. "I think sometimes it gives you someone to stand beside while you try for yourself." He smiled at that, eyes soft. "Then I reckon I'll stop fighting the gift." She left the lamp burning low. The flame trembled, but didn't falter. By the time the first snow began to fall, a fine dusting that came from nowhere and melted on the warm earth. Jameson had dozed in the chair. Evelyn pulled the quilt from her bed and draped it over his shoulders. He stirred, murmuring something half asleep. "You'll catch cold," she whispered. His answer was a faint smile. "Not anymore." She sat by the fire until the logs sank to embers. Outside, the snow thickened, blanketing the graves, the barn, the hill, every scar the land had worn. For the first time since she could remember, Evelyn felt the house breathe, slow, even, alive. She turned to look at him once more. The shadows had softened his face. The years of running were gone from it, replaced by something gentler. Above the mantel, the horseshoe gleamed faintly in the firelight, its curve catching every flicker, every heartbeat of warmth. Evelyn leaned back, eyes half closed, and whispered into the quiet, "A home for the living." The chime answered, soft and certain, a single note rising into the stillness like a benediction. And for that night, and maybe for the rest that followed, neither of them was alone. If this story touched something quiet in you, tell me in the comments. I'd love to know which moment stayed with you the longest. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay close, because more Western tales of love, loss, and second chances are waiting just around the bend.